My daughter's teacher called me livid and screaming, saying, "Your daughter got another A." She said it like Zara had committed a crime. Isn't that good news? I asked. No black student has ever scored this high in my 23 years of teaching AP Calculus. She must be getting help. My daughter studies 6 hours every night. Someone's feeding her answers. I've been watching her during tests. She finishes too quickly because she knows the material. That's impossible. These concepts are extremely advanced. I had her solve problems on the board today. She got them right, but she must have memorized the solutions beforehand or she understands calculus. Mrs. Johnson, I know you want to believe your daughter is gifted, but let's be realistic here. I've separated her from other students, checked her calculator, watched her like a hawk. I can't figure out her system yet, but I will. Her system is studying. I've taught hundreds of students. I know when something's not right. She doesn't even ask questions in class. She doesn't need to. Everyone needs help with calculus. The white and Asian students ask questions constantly. Your daughter sits there pretending she understands everything. Maybe she actually understands. Mrs. Holloway sighed like I was a child. I'm going to request she take her next test in the principal's office alone. No calculator. Fine. Zara took the test in isolation. Got another A+. Mrs. Holloway called again. She memorized the test somehow. How would she do that? I don't know, but there's no other explanation. I'm changing her to a different test version next time. Do what you need to do. Different test version. A plus. Another angry call. I'm recommending she be removed from AP Calculus for getting perfect scores for academic dishonesty. I can't prove yet. It's disrupting the other students. They're questioning why they can't score as high. Maybe because my daughter's smarter than them. Mrs. Johnson, that's not helpful. I've had parents of other students complaining. They say, if Zara is not cheating, then I must be giving her special treatment. So, either she's cheating or you're helping her cheat. I would never. But she must be cheating because she's black. I didn't say that. You said no black student has scored this high in 23 years. That's just a fact. What happened to the black students who tried? They struggled like everyone else. Calculus is hard. Did you accuse them of cheating when they did well? They didn't do this well. But if they had silence, then I need to protect the integrity of my classroom. I started attending school board meetings. Turns out Mrs. O'Leary had complained about 3 other black students in previous years. Destiny Williams, accused of plagiarism in pre-calc, moved to regular math. Jordan Davis, accused of copying homework, dropped the class. Malik Turner, tested in isolation so many times he developed anxiety. Switched schools. I met with their parents. We compared notes. Same phrases. Doesn't ask questions. Finishes too quickly. No black student has ever. Must be getting help. The principal, Mr. Yates, wouldn't listen. Mrs. O'Leary is our most experienced math teacher. If she has concerns, they're valid. Her only concern is that my daughter's black and good at math. That's a serious accusation. So is accusing my daughter of cheating with no evidence. She's just being thorough. Spring semester, the International Math Olympiad qualifier exam. Top scorers from each state compete nationally. Proctored by external evaluators filmed. No accusations possible. Zara registered. Mrs. Holloway found out. Called me immediately. She can't take that exam. Why not? She's not ready. It'll hurt her confidence when she fails. Let her try. I forbid it as her teacher. You can't forbid standardized tests. If she fails, it reflects badly on my teaching. I thought she was cheating. How would her failure reflect on you? I meant I just don't think she should take it. Zara took it anyway. Scored in the top 5 for our state. Only student from our school to qualify for nationals. The newspaper wanted to do a story. They interviewed Mrs. Holloway about her star student. "I always knew Zara was special," she told the reporter. "I pushed her hard because I saw her potential. Some teachers might have doubted her, but I never did." The article quoted her extensively, how she nurtured Zara's talent, how she gave her extra challenges, how proud she was. Other parents started requesting their kids be transferred to Mrs. Holloway's class since she was so good at developing mathematical genius. The district superintendent called Mrs. Holloway personally to congratulate her on Zara's success. Mentioned she was being considered for Teacher of the Year. Then I forwarded the superintendent every email Mrs. Ono had sent me. Every accusation voicemail she left. She left. Every voicemail where she said Zara must be cheating. Every accusation about getting help. Every claim that no black student had ever scored this high. Every insistence that my daughter couldn't possibly understand calculus on her own. The superintendent's office confirmed they got my email within an hour. His assistant called to schedule a meeting for the next morning. I spent that evening organizing printed copies of everything, my hands shaking as I sorted through months of documentation. Each email felt heavier than the last. Proof of what Zara had endured while I'd been trying to work within the system. Dr. Pearson's expression changed as he read through the emails at our meeting. Professional interest shifted to visible discomfort. He asked permission to forward everything to the district's compliance officer, explaining this fell under their discrimination investigation protocols. I agreed immediately. The compliance officer called that afternoon. Her name was Diane Hewitt. She scheduled a formal interview and explained the investigation would take several weeks. She asked me not to discuss details publicly while they gathered information from multiple sources. I understood the need for discretion, even though part of me wanted to shout this from every rooftop. Zara came home from the school reporting that Mrs. Holloway seemed distracted during class. Nervous, barely making eye contact with students. I didn't tell Zara about the investigation yet. I wanted to protect her from disappointment if nothing came of it. Diane interviewed me for 2 hours. She recorded everything and took detailed notes about each incident. She asked specifically about the other black students Mrs. as Holloway had mentioned. I provided contact information for the Williams, Davis, and Turner families. Over the next week, Diane contacted each family. Marina called me excitedly to report that someone was finally taking their experiences seriously. She said Reed broke down crying during his interview because he'd felt so powerless watching Jordan suffer. 3 white parents came forward, too, mentioning their children felt uncomfortable with how Mrs. Holloway spoke about black students. Mrs. Holloway got placed on paid leave pending the investigation outcome. A substitute took over her AP calculus class. Zara reported that the substitute was encouraging and supportive, treating all students with respect. The contrast highlighted how abnormal Mrs. Holloway's behavior had been. The newspaper reporter who wrote the original article contacted the district asking for comment. The district released a brief statement about reviewing concerns regarding a teacher without naming Mrs. Holloway specifically. I received an anonymous email from someone claiming to be her former colleague describing similar patterns with black students over the years that previous administrators had dismissed. The person was afraid to come forward publicly, but wanted me to know this had been happening for a long time. Diane scheduled a follow-up interview to discuss the anonymous email. She asked if I knew of any other witnesses. I mentioned the white parents who recently came forward and suggested she speak with current and former students directly. The investigation expanded to include dozens of interviews. A pattern emerged of Mrs. Holloway treating black students with suspicion while praising white and Asian students for the same achievements. Several students described her making comments about who naturally excels at mathematics. 3 weeks in, Diane interviewed Mrs. Holloway. According to the compliance report summary I received later, Mrs. Holloway defended her actions as maintaining academic standards and insisted she treated all students equally. The Math Olympiad national competition happened while the investigation continued. Zara traveled with the state team to compete. She performed well, though didn't place in the top 10 nationally. Being around other mathematically gifted students who respected her abilities helped heal some of the damage from Mrs. Ao's treatment. The school board held a closed session to review preliminary findings while Zara was at nationals. Marina, Reed, and I attended the public comment period beforehand. Each of us spoke for 3 minutes about our children's experiences. The board didn't make immediate decisions, but scheduled a follow-up session for 2 weeks later. The board president acknowledged the investigation revealed concerning patterns that required careful consideration and appropriate response. Mrs. Holloway's lawyer sent a letter threatening legal action if she got terminated. The letter argued her teaching methods were protected by academic freedom and the investigation was biased. The district's legal team reviewed the evidence and determined the discrimination case was strong enough to withstand challenge. Zara struggled with anxiety as the school year wound down. She had nightmares about being accused of cheating. She felt like she had to prove herself constantly. I found her a therapist who specialized in helping students of color process experiences with racism in educational settings. The therapy helped Zara articulate feelings she'd been suppressing all year. She admitted she'd started doubting her own abilities because Mrs. Holloway's accusations were so persistent. Hearing her say this broke my heart and strengthened my resolve to see this through. 4 weeks after the investigation began, Diane completed her report and submitted it to the superintendent with recommendations. She found substantial evidence of discriminatory treatment based on race. She recommended formal disciplinary action, including mandatory training and probationary status. Dr. Pearson scheduled another meeting with me to discuss findings before making them public. He acknowledged the district failed these students by not investigating the pattern earlier. He apologized directly for the harm caused to Zara and the other families. He explained Mrs. Holloway would face formal reprimand, mandatory bias training, loss of her AP calculus assignment, and 2 years probationary status with regular classroom observations. She wouldn't be fired due to tenure protections and union contract requirements, but her career advancement was effectively ended. I felt conflicted about the outcome. Part of me wanted Mrs. O'Leary fired completely. Dr. Pearson assured me the probationary status meant any future complaints would result in immediate termination proceedings. The Teacher of the Year nomination got withdrawn. The district issued a formal letter to Mrs. Holloway's personnel file documenting the discriminatory pattern. This became part of her permanent employment record and would follow her if she ever tried to transfer to another district. The school board voted to implement new policies requiring documentation of academic integrity concerns, mandatory bias training for all teachers, and a formal process for students and families to report discriminatory treatment without fear of retaliation. The district established a review committee to examine historical discipline and academic tracking data for racial disparities. This committee would report findings annually and recommend policy changes to address any patterns discovered. Marina, Reed and I met with the superintendent to discuss how the new policies would be enforced. He committed to quarterly public reports on implementation progress. The newspaper ran a follow-up story about the investigation outcome and policy changes. This time, they interviewed us about our advocacy. We spoke carefully about holding institutions accountable while protecting our children's privacy. Several teachers reached out privately to thank us for speaking up. They said they'd witnessed Mrs. Holloway's behavior, but didn't know how to address it. Their validation felt important, even though I wished they'd spoken up sooner. Zara finished the school year with straight A grades, including her A+ in AP Calculus under the substitute teacher. She took the AP exam and scored a 5, the highest possible score, providing yet another external validation of her abilities. Mrs. Holloway submitted a brief written apology as part of her disciplinary agreement. The apology was short and didn't really acknowledge the specific harm she caused. It felt empty, like words written to satisfy a requirement rather than genuine remorse. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I didn't share it with Zara because it would feel more hurtful than healing to see such a hollow gesture after everything she endured. Summer arrived and Zara enrolled in a mathematics program at a nearby university for gifted high school students. The program ran for 6 weeks with classes 5 days each week. I drove her to campus that first morning and watched her walk into the building with her backpack. She turned back once to wave at me, smiling wider than I'd seen in months. When I picked her up that afternoon, she talked non-stop about the problems they'd worked on and the other students in her class. She made friends with students who shared her passion for math. Kids who understood what it felt like to see patterns in numbers and get excited about proofs. The environment celebrated her abilities rather than question them. She came home energized instead of drained. August brought the launch of the district's bias training program. All teachers had to complete it before the new school year started. The curriculum specifically addressed assumptions about student abilities based on race and the harm caused by unexamined biases. The training included case studies that looked familiar, though names were changed. I wondered if teachers recognized the patterns from their own schools. Marina called me one afternoon in late August. Destiny had decided to return to advanced math classes for her senior year. She felt more confident that the new policies would protect her. Marina's voice shook with emotion as she told me. This felt like a meaningful victory, even though Destiny had lost 2 years of advanced coursework she could never get back. Reed called a few days later with different news. Jordan chose to stay in regular math and focus on other subjects where he felt more confident. Reed respected that decision. Not every student wants to return to the environment where they were harmed. That's valid, too. Jordan found his passion in history and literature instead. He was thriving in those classes. Malik's family decided not to participate beyond their initial interview. They chose to move forward at his new school rather than revisit trauma. I understood their choice, even though part of me wished we'd had their voices as part of the public record. Sometimes healing means letting go rather than fighting. Zara's senior year began with a different AP calculus teacher. Mr. R. Williams treated her with respect and encouragement from day one. He called on her in class without suspicion. He praised her work without surprise. She was still processing anxiety from the previous year, though. Therapy continued to help her separate Mrs. Holloway's racism from her own worth and abilities. Some days were harder than others. The district's data review committee released its first report in September. The numbers showed significant racial disparities in AP course enrollment and advanced tracking decisions. Black and Latino students were underrepresented in advanced programs, even when they had similar test scores and grades as white and Asian students. The report recommended policy changes to address how students got identified for advanced programs and how academic integrity concerns got documented. The data made visible what families like ours had experienced for years. The district invited me to join their Equity Advisory Committee as a parent representative. The invitation came in an email from Dr. Pearson. The committee met monthly to review policies and make recommendations. I accepted despite the time commitment. The work of changing systems is ongoing and requires sustained attention from people willing to push for accountability. I couldn't fix everything, but I could keep showing up. Mrs. Holloway transferred to teaching regular geometry classes at a different high school in the district. She moved away from advanced students and got regular administrative observations. Some parents at her new school expressed concern when they learned about the investigation. The district maintained they were monitoring her closely. I wondered if close monitoring would be enough, or if she'd find new ways to harm students when people stopped watching. Zara started working on college applications in September, spending weekends at the kitchen table with her laptop open to application portals. She wrote essay after essay about her passion for mathematics, but the words felt incomplete without acknowledging what she'd survived to get here. The first draft avoided mentioning Mrs. Away entirely, focusing only on her love of problem-solving and abstract thinking. She showed it to me and asked if it felt honest. I told her the truth matters, even when it's hard to write about. She started over, this time addressing how she'd learned to advocate for herself when authority figures questioned her abilities based on race rather than evidence. The essay described studying 6 hours every night, not just to learn calculus, but to prove she deserved to be in that classroom. It explained how being accused of cheating taught her that excellence sometimes requires defending yourself against people who refuse to see your worth. Several months later, after acceptances started arriving, Admissions officers from 3 different universities mentioned her essay specifically during scholarship interviews. They said her resilience and self-advocacy impressed them as much as her perfect grades and test scores. One told her that many students face discrimination, but few develop the courage to name it clearly and keep pushing forward anyway. The following spring, our state's Math Olympiad team performed better than expected at the national competition. 2 students placed in the top 20, and the program received increased funding and support from the state education department. Zara volunteered to mentor younger students interested in competition mathematics, meeting with them twice a month to work through practice problems and competition strategies. She told me it felt important to create the supportive environment she wished she'd had from the beginning. The younger students looked up to her, asking questions without fear of being judged or accused. She encouraged them to trust their abilities and speak up when they knew the answer. Watching her help a nervous freshman work through a complex proof, I saw her transform pain into purpose. The mentoring gave her a way to take something harmful and use it to help others avoid similar experiences. 3 months into the new school year, Diane called me on a Tuesday afternoon. The district compliance office had received 2 complaints about Mrs. Holloway from parents at her new school. Both complaints described concerns about how she spoke to students of color in her geometry classes. One parent reported Mrs. Holloway questioning whether their son really understood the material despite his consistent test scores. Another described Mrs. the Holloway expressing surprise that their daughter could explain geometric proof so clearly. The probationary status meant these complaints triggered immediate investigation rather than being dismissed or delayed. Diane explained the district was taking the complaints seriously because the pattern we documented was now part of Mrs. Holloway's official record. The previous investigation made it harder for administrators to ignore ongoing concerns or attribute them to misunderstandings. She assured me the new families would receive support and that Mrs. Holloway's classroom practices were being observed more carefully. Now, Diane's call reminded me that our advocacy had created accountability mechanisms that protected other families. The pattern we documented followed Mrs. Holloway to her new position, making her behavior visible to administrators who might otherwise have dismissed individual complaints. The system wasn't perfect, but it was better than before when families faced discrimination alone without institutional memory or support. I thanked Diane for keeping me informed and asked her to let the new families know they weren't alone in this experience. She promised to connect them with resources and ensure the investigation proceeded thoroughly. The thick envelope from Zara's top choice university arrived on a Friday afternoon in December. She opened it at the kitchen table with shaking hands, pulling out the acceptance letter and scholarship offer. The letter specifically mentioned her demonstrated excellence in mathematics and her Math Olympiad performance. The scholarship covered full tuition plus a stipend for books and research opportunities. Zara read the letter twice, then looked up at me with tears running down her face. These were happy tears, relief tears, validation tears. She'd worked so hard for this moment, studying through doubt and accusation and isolation. The acceptance proved what I'd always known, but what Mrs. Holloway tried to deny. Zara belonged in advanced mathematics. She deserved to be there. Her abilities were real and recognized by people who actually understood mathematical excellence. Because Mrs. Holloway had seniority and strong support from some parents. She said, "Our advocacy changed how the board thinks about responding to discrimination complaints." Destiny received college acceptances to strong programs in February, including admission to the State University's Honors College. Marina called me crying happy tears when the acceptances arrived. Destiny had rebuilt her confidence in advanced coursework during her senior year, proving to herself that she belonged in challenging classes. Marina and I celebrated together over coffee, grateful that our daughters were moving forward despite the obstacles placed in their paths. We talked about how different things might have been if we'd fought back years earlier, but we also acknowledged that we did what we could when we understood the full pattern. Our daughters were succeeding now, and that mattered more than dwelling on what we couldn't change about the past. The district's new academic integrity documentation policy released its first annual report in March. The data showed concerns were being raised more equally across racial groups now that teachers had to provide specific evidence rather than relying on feelings about who seemed capable. Before the policy, Black and Latino students received academic dishonesty referrals at 3 times the rate of white and Asian students despite similar grade distributions. After implementation, the referral rates became nearly equal across groups. The data proved the policy was working to reduce discriminatory referrals. Teachers couldn't simply accuse students without documentation anymore. The numbers made visible what families like ours had experienced for years, but couldn't prove without systematic data collection. Mrs. Holloway submitted her resignation effective at the end of the school year. She cited personal reasons in her resignation letter, but everyone involved in the investigations understood she was leaving rather than continue teaching under probationary observation. The district accepted her resignation without protest. She left teaching entirely instead of trying to transfer to another district where her record would follow her. Some people might say we drove a dedicated teacher out of the profession, but I knew we held an educator accountable for harming students over decades. The resignation felt like incomplete justice, but more accountability than most discriminatory teachers ever face. The high school posted job openings for 2 new math teachers in early summer, and the hiring committee included parent representatives for the first time in the district's history. I served on that committee alongside 3 other parents, and we asked every candidate specific questions about supporting students of color in advanced classes. We asked how they'd respond to a high-achieving black student, what they knew about culturally responsive teaching, whether they'd ever challenged their own biases about who belongs in advanced math. Some candidates gave textbook answers that sounded rehearsed. Others admitted they'd never thought much about race in teaching, which at least felt honest. 2 candidates stood out because they talked about specific training they'd completed and actual classroom experiences where they'd worked to make sure all students felt they belonged. The committee hired both of them. One had taught in a diverse urban district for 7 years and ran a summer math program specifically for underrepresented students. The other had completed a master's degree focused on equity in STEM education and talked passionately about breaking down barriers to advanced coursework. Neither had Mrs. Holloway's decades of experience. But they had something more important. They believed all students could excel at math regardless of race. Registration for Zara's senior year AP Calculus class showed something I'd never seen before. 12 black students enrolled. The previous year, Zara had been one of 3. The year before that, the class had 2 black students total. Families who'd kept their kids in regular math because they didn't trust how advanced classes worked were willing to try again. Now parents told me they felt safer sending their children into AP Calculus, knowing Mrs. Holloway was gone and the new teachers had equity training. Seeing those enrollment numbers felt like watching something shift, not fixed, but moving in a better direction. Zara met some of the other black students during summer orientation, and she came home talking about how different it felt to not be one of only a few in the room. She said it made her realize how isolated she'd felt the previous year, even though she'd never let herself think about it much at the time. The district invited me to speak at a parent meeting about advocacy in September, and I almost said no because public speaking makes me nervous. But Marina convinced me that other families needed to hear what we'd learned. The meeting room held about 50 parents from schools across the district, and I stood at the front with printed copies of the timeline I'd created tracking Mrs. O'Leary's accusations. I told them to document everything in writing, save every email, take notes after every phone call with dates and times, record what was said in meetings if the district allows it. I explained how building the coalition with Destiny's and Jordan's families had made the pattern undeniable in ways a single complaint never could. I emphasized that administrators often dismiss individual concerns but have a harder time ignoring multiple families telling the same story. I talked about being persistent even when principals and superintendents act like you're overreacting or being difficult. I said the system counts on parents giving up, so refusing to give up is the most powerful thing you can do. Several parents took notes. A few wiped their eyes when I described how long Zara had endured Mrs. O'Leary's treatment before we understood the full pattern. After the presentation, parents lined up to talk to me, and what they shared made clear that Mrs. Holloway was just one example of a much bigger problem. A mother from the middle school described her son being tracked out of advanced English despite high test scores with teachers insisting he be more comfortable in regular classes. A father from the elementary school talked about his daughter being disciplined more harshly than white students for the same behavior. A parent from another high school mentioned their child being discouraged from taking AP chemistry because the teacher didn't think they were ready despite having straight A's in previous science classes. Same patterns, different teachers, different schools, different subjects. The conversations lasted over an hour past the scheduled meeting end time. We exchanged contact information and talked about staying connected to address issues as they came up. I drove home that night understanding that the fight with Mrs. Holloway had been one battle in a war that wouldn't end anytime soon. The work of changing systems required constant attention from people willing to push back against discrimination wherever it appeared. Graduation day arrived in late May with clear skies and temperatures in the 70s. Zara finished as valedictorian with a perfect 4.00 GPA, and the school asked her to give the graduation speech. She spent 2 weeks writing and revising it, and she let me read drafts but made her own decisions about what to include. The final speech talked about perseverance when people doubt you, about proving yourself through excellence, about not letting other people's limited expectations define what you're capable of achieving. She never said Mrs. Holloway's name, but everyone who knew the story understood exactly who she meant when she discussed pushing through situations where teachers questioned whether she belonged in challenging classes. She talked about the importance of having people who believe in you, and she thanked me and her other supporters by name. Her voice stayed steady through the whole speech, strong and clear. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded for almost a minute. I cried watching her up there in her cap and gown, thinking about everything she'd survived to reach that moment. After the ceremony, several of Zara's teachers found her in the crowd to offer congratulations. Her chemistry teacher hugged her and said she'd been an absolute joy to teach. Her English teacher told her the college she was attending was lucky to have her. Her new calculus teacher, one of the ones hired to replace Mrs. Holloway, said Zara had set a standard of excellence that inspired the whole class. The math department chair pulled Zara aside and apologized for not recognizing Mrs. and Holloway's pattern sooner, saying the department should have protected students better. Each conversation seemed to help balance out some of the damage from the teacher who'd spent a year trying to tear Zara down. Support from educators who actually believed in her abilities mattered, even if it couldn't erase what Mrs. Holloway had done. Marina, Reed, and I sat together in the bleachers, watching the graduates walk across the stage to receive their diplomas. Destiny walked with her head high, wearing the gold honor cords she'd earned. Jordan walked with a huge smile, waving to his family. Zara walked with quiet confidence, shaking hands with the principal and superintendent, who'd eventually listened to our concerns. We talked about how different things might have been if we'd given up, if we'd accepted the district's initial dismissals, if we'd let Mrs. Oloy continue her pattern unchallenged. Our advocacy hadn't fixed everything. The system was still far from where it needed to be. But we'd protected future students from experiencing what our children had endured. We'd created accountability where none existed before. We'd proven that parents working together could force institutions to respond to discrimination they'd rather ignore. That felt like something worth celebrating, even while acknowledging how much work remained. The summer before college, Zara got a job as a teaching assistant in a mathematics program for middle school students of color. The program ran for 6 weeks at a community center, focusing on building confidence and skills in students who'd been told they weren't math people. Zara worked with small groups, helping them solve problems and showing them that making mistakes was part of learning. She came home energized most days, talking about breakthroughs students had or funny things kids said. One evening, she told me that helping younger students see themselves as mathematicians felt like taking something painful and transforming it into something with purpose. She said Mrs. Holloway had tried to make her doubt her abilities, but now she could use her experience to help other students avoid that same doubt. She could be the encouraging voice she'd needed during her junior year. In early August, I received a message through social media from Malik Turner's mother. She said Malik was thriving at his new school and had decided to major in computer science in college. He'd rebuilt his confidence in his abilities and was excited about his future in a technical field. She thanked me for pursuing accountability with the district, even though their family had chosen not to participate actively in the investigation. She wrote that it had helped them heal to know someone fought back against Mrs. Holloway, that our advocacy had validated their decision to remove Malik from that toxic situation, that seeing consequences for Mrs. Holloway's actions had given them closure they didn't know they needed. I wrote back thanking her for reaching out and saying I was glad Malik was doing well. Her message reminded me that the impact of holding Mrs. Holloway accountable extended beyond just the families who'd been directly involved in the investigation. The district's Equity Advisory Committee met every month through the fall, and I brought research articles showing how teacher recommendations for gifted programs reflected racial bias more than actual student ability. The committee reviewed data from 3 neighboring districts that had switched to multiple measures for identifying talented students, and the results showed significant increases in Black and Latino enrollment in advanced classes. We drafted a proposal requiring schools to use standardized assessments, student work portfolios, and parent input alongside teacher recommendations. The school board reviewed our proposal in December and voted to implement the new identification process starting the following year. The policy wouldn't help Zara, but it would protect younger students from being overlooked because teachers couldn't imagine them succeeding. Zara packed boxes in her room while I sat on her bed watching. She folded clothes and sorted through textbooks, deciding what to keep and what to donate. I asked what she'd learned from everything with Holloway. She stopped packing and sat next to me. She said the experience taught her that doing excellent work was the best way to answer people who doubted her. But she also learned she shouldn't have to work twice as hard just to be seen as half as good because of her skin color. She said proving herself over and over got exhausting and future students shouldn't have to go through what she went through. Her voice stayed steady, but I saw how much the year had cost her. I told her she was right about both things. Excellence mattered, but the system needed to change so Black students didn't face constant suspicion and doubt. I explained that the work of fixing these problems would continue long after she left for college, and progress happened slowly through policy changes and accountability measures. Zara picked up a calculus textbook and ran her fingers over the cover. She said she wanted to come back during college breaks and mentor high school students, especially kids who looked like her and needed to see someone who'd made it through. She wanted to create the supportive environment she wished had existed from the start, where students could focus on learning instead of defending themselves. A thick envelope arrived from the new AP Calculus teacher 6 days before move-in day. I opened it while Zara finished breakfast, and inside was a handwritten letter on the school stationery. The teacher thanked Zara for her leadership in class and her willingness to help other students understand difficult concepts. The letter described how Zara's presence had raised the level of discussion and made the class better for everyone. The teacher wrote that Zara's combination of skill and generosity represented the best of what education could be. Zara read the letter twice, then put it in her college folder with her acceptance materials. The dorm parking lot overflowed with cars and families on move-in day. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs while other students and parents did the same. Zara's roommate arrived an hour after we did, and within 10 minutes, they were talking about problem sets and proof techniques. The roommate was also studying mathematics and had competed in math competitions throughout high school. They compared favorite theorems and debated different approaches to solving integration problems. Watching Zara excited and confident about her academic future, I felt grateful that Holloway attempts to crush her spirit had failed. Zara belonged here, surrounded by people who celebrated her abilities instead of questioning them. My phone buzzed 3 days into the semester with a text from Zara. She'd just finished her first college calculus class and wanted to tell me about the professor. She wrote that he was brilliant and encouraging, treating every student like a capable mathematician regardless of their background. She described how he asked challenging questions and seemed genuinely excited when students engaged with the material. Her final text said, "Learning was supposed to feel like this." And I knew that despite the painful detour with Holloway, Zara had arrived exactly where she belonged, ready to excel without anyone questioning whether she deserved to be.